My dad called me dead weight, so I bought his company. Some secrets have a way of surfacing at the worst possible moment. Mine happened to surface on the day I signed the papers that would change my father's life forever. He never saw it coming. But then again, he never really saw me at all. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by your own family, and stick around because this story gets better with every twist. Welcome to Revenge Treats, where we serve justice, one story at a time. My name is Celeste. I am 34 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon, in a converted warehouse loft that overlooks the industrial district where my father built his empire. Every morning, I wake up to the sound of freight trains carrying lumber and steel, the same sounds that lulled me to sleep as a child when we lived in the cramped apartment above his first workshop. Back then, those sounds meant possibility. Now they sound like vindication. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm telling this story from the very building where it all began. Not my father's gleaming corporate headquarters downtown, but the original Blackwood construction facility now, converted into luxury lofts. I bought the entire building 2 years ago. Not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder of how far I've come, and how much further I'm willing to go. I suppose I should start with the day that changed everything, though. It wasn't dramatic in the way you might expect. There were no raised voices, no slamming doors, just my father, Harrison Blackwood, sitting behind his mahogany desk in his corner office, looking at me the way you'd look at a stain on expensive fabric. But to understand that moment, you need to understand the 31 years that led up to it. You need to understand what it's like to grow up as the daughter of a man who built skyscrapers, but couldn't see the potential in his own child. Harrison Blackwood started with nothing, a fact he reminded everyone of at least 3 times per conversation. Born in a logging town in eastern Oregon, he'd worked construction jobs through high school, saved every penny, and borrowed against everything he owned to start Blackwood Construction in 1985. By the time I was born in 1989, he'd established himself as one of Portland's most reliable commercial contractors. My earliest memories are of construction sites. While other kids spent weekends at parks or movies, I was trailing behind my father as he inspected job sites, wearing a hard hat that was 3 sizes too big, and steel-toed boots that made me look like I was playing dress-up. I loved those days, the smell of sawdust and concrete, the symphony of hammers and heavy machinery, the satisfaction of watching something take shape from nothing. Construction is about problem-solving, my father would tell me as we walked through half-finished buildings. Every day brings new challenges, and you have to think 3 steps ahead to stay profitable. I absorbed every word, every lesson, every casual observation about load-bearing walls and foundation requirements, and the importance of staying under budget. By the time I was 12, I could read blueprints better than most adults. By 15, I was spending summers working on his crews, not as the boss's daughter getting special treatment, but as the hardest working kid on the site. My father seemed proud of my interest in the business, or at least amused by it. He'd introduce me to clients and subcontractors as my little engineer, and I'd glow with pride at the recognition. Construction was our shared language, the one place where I felt like I had his complete attention and approval. That changed when Marcus was born. My brother arrived when I was 3 years old, and from the moment he could walk, he was designated as the heir apparent to the Blackwood construction legacy. It didn't matter that Marcus showed 0 interest in construction, or that he preferred video games to job sites, or that he once threw up after his first visit to a concrete pour. He was the son, which meant he was automatically more valuable than I could ever be. The shift wasn't immediate or obvious. My father still took me to job sites, still answered my technical questions, still seemed genuinely impressed by my understanding of the business. But gradually, conversations that used to include me began happening behind closed doors. Plans that I used to help develop were suddenly too complex for me to understand. The future of the company which had once felt like something I was being groomed for, became something that would obviously belong to Marcus once he was old enough. To take it, I compensated by working twice as hard. In high school, I took every math and science course available, joined the engineering club, and spent my free time learning AutoCAD and studying architectural design. While Marcus was playing football and going to parties, I was earning college credits and interning with local engineering firms. When it came time for college, I chose Oregon State University for their renowned civil engineering program. My father seemed pleased, or at least supportive, when I announced my major. "Good foundation for understanding the business," he said. "Engineering knowledge will make you more valuable to whatever company you end up working for." Whatever company I end up working for. Not when you join the family business. Or, this will help you run Blackwood Construction someday. Just generic encouragement for a generic future that had nothing to do with the company I'd been breathing, thinking, and dreaming about my entire life. Marcus, meanwhile, was encouraged to pursue business at the University of Oregon. "Business is where the real decisions get made," my father explained. "Engineers solve problems, but business majors run companies." I threw myself into my studies with the kind of intensity that worried my professors and concerned my roommates. I graduated summa cum laude with a bachelor's degree in civil engineering, then immediately enrolled in a master's program focusing on structural engineering and sustainable design. While my classmates were partying and enjoying college life, I was designing buildings in my head and calculating load distributions for fun. The sustainable design focus was my own addition, inspired by spending summers in Portland and watching the city's growing commitment to environmental responsibility. I could see the construction industry changing, shifting toward green building practices and energy efficiency. It seemed obvious that any construction company serious about long-term success would need to understand and embrace these trends. My father was less enthusiastic about this direction. "Green building is a luxury market," he said when I explained. "My master's thesis on sustainable commercial construction. Most clients care about three things: cost, timeline, and quality. Everything else is just expensive extras." I disagreed, but I'd learned by then that disagreeing with Harrison Blackwood was rarely productive. Instead, I channeled my energy into becoming the most knowledgeable person I could be about both traditional construction methods and emerging sustainable practices. If I was going to have to prove myself twice as hard as Marcus, I'd make sure I was twice as qualified. After completing my master's degree, I had offers from 3 different engineering firms, including one in Seattle that would have doubled my expected starting salary. But there was never really a choice. I wanted to work for Blackwood Construction, wanted to be part of building the company that had shaped my entire worldview. My father hired me immediately, which I took as a sign that he recognized my value to the organization. What I didn't realize at the time was that he hired me not because he saw me as future leadership material, but because I was cheap, qualified labor who happened to share his last name. My starting position was junior project engineer, reporting to a series of middle managers who had less education and experience than I did, but who'd been with the company longer. My responsibilities included reviewing blueprints for compliance issues, calculating material requirements, and occasionally visiting job sites to resolve technical problems. It wasn't glamorous work, but I attacked it with enthusiasm. I caught design flaws that would have cost thousands of dollars to fix during construction. I identified opportunities to reduce material waste and improve efficiency. I developed relationships with subcontractors and suppliers, learning the business from every angle. After 2 years, I was promoted to project engineer. After 4 years, senior project engineer. My responsibilities grew, my salary increased, and my expertise became invaluable to the company's operations. But I never felt like I was being groomed for leadership. I was a highly skilled employee, not a future owner. Marcus, meanwhile, graduated from college and immediately joined the company as a business development associate, a made-up title that meant he got to attend client meetings, networking events, and strategic planning sessions while I was calculating rebar requirements and reviewing soil reports. The disparity became impossible to ignore. Marcus would spend afternoons on the golf course with potential clients while I worked 12-hour days ensuring our projects stayed on schedule and under budget. He'd present proposals that I'd written and researched, taking credit for relationships I'd developed and contracts I'd secured. When projects succeeded, he got recognition for his business acumen. When they failed, I got blamed for technical oversights. I tried talking to my father about it once, during one of our increasingly rare one-on-one meetings. I feel like I'm not being utilized to my full potential, I said carefully. I have ideas about how we could expand the business, ways we could differentiate ourselves in the market. Like what? He asked, though his tone suggested he was humoring me rather than genuinely interested. Sustainable building practices, green construction, LEED certification. The market is moving in that direction, and we could position ourselves as leaders rather than followers. He leaned back in his chair, the same chair I used to spin in as a child while he worked late into the evening. Celeste, you're a good engineer. But engineering and business strategy are different skill sets. Focus on what you do well and let Marcus handle the business side. It was a dismissal wrapped in false praise, the kind of response that left me feeling frustrated and unheard. But I kept working, kept contributing, kept hoping that eventually my value would be recognized and rewarded appropriately. That hope died on a Tuesday afternoon in October, 3 years ago. I had just presented my father with the most comprehensive business proposal I'd ever developed. 3 months of research, 6 weeks of writing, countless sleepless nights perfecting every detail. The proposal outlined a complete expansion into sustainable building practices, market analysis, financial projections, implementation timeline, competitive advantages. It could have doubled our revenue within 2 years and positioned Blackwood Construction as Portland's premier green building contractor. My father listened to the entire presentation without interruption, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he set the proposal aside and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger or disappointment, but something colder and more final. Celeste, he said, not bothering to glance up from the quarterly report spread before him. I need you to understand something. The tone of his voice made my stomach drop. This wasn't going to be a discussion about implementation strategies or budget allocation. This was something else entirely. He finally looked up, his steel gray eyes holding that familiar mixture of disappointment and dismissal that had followed me through my entire life, but magnified to a degree that took my breath away. You're dead weight, sweetheart. Always have been. The words hung in the air like smoke. Not because they were shocking. I'd heard variations of this my entire life, but because of how casually he delivered them. Like commenting on the weather, like stating an obvious fact that everyone already knew. I've been thinking, he continued, straightening his tie with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. It might be time for you to find your own path, somewhere else. I remember the taste in my mouth then, metallic and sharp. Not heartbreak. I'd moved past that years ago. This was something colder, more calculating, something that felt like clarity. Are you firing me? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I'm suggesting that maybe construction isn't your calling. He leaned back in his leather chair, the same chair where he'd made thousands of decisions that had shaped our family and our business. Your brother understands the business. He has the instincts. He knows how to talk to clients, how to close deals, how to think strategically about growth. Marcus. Of course. My younger brother by 3 years, who had joined the company straight, out of college with a business degree, and 0 construction experience. Who spent more time at networking events than on job sites. Who couldn't tell a load-bearing wall from drywall if his life depended on it. Who had never designed anything more complex than a PowerPoint presentation. I have a master's degree in structural engineering, I said quietly, fighting to keep my voice level. I've been working construction sites since I was 16. I know this business better than anyone except you. Book smarts aren't the same as business sense. He picked up his pen, a clear dismissal that felt like a physical slap. Marcus closed the Riverside development deal last week. $2 million. What have you brought in lately? I could have told him about the 3 contracts I'd secured through my sustainable building contacts over the past 6 months. I could have mentioned that the Riverside deal had been my lead, my relationship with the client, my preliminary work that Marcus had swooped in to finish after I'd done all the hard work of relationship building and technical planning. I could have pointed out that my engineering expertise had saved the company literally hundreds of thousands of dollars in avoided mistakes and improved efficiency over the years. But I'd learned long ago that facts bounced off my father like rain off a tin roof. He'd already made up his mind about my value to the company, and no amount of evidence would change his perception. Instead, I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and said, "You're right. Maybe it is time for me to find my own path." Something flickered across his face then, surprise maybe, or disappointment that I hadn't fought back, hadn't pleaded for another chance, hadn't dissolved into tears and apologies. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that practiced indifference that had shaped my childhood and defined our relationship. "Good," he said, already turning his attention back to his paperwork. "I'll have HR prepare your severance package. 2 weeks' salary, plus accrued vacation time. That should give you time to find something else. 2 weeks' salary. After 8 years with the company, after contributing to projects worth millions of dollars, after saving the company from countless costly mistakes, I was worth 2 weeks' salary. I walked out of that office with my spine straight and my head high, past the receptionist who wouldn't meet my eyes, past the project managers who'd worked under me for years, and who suddenly found their computer screens fascinating, past the framed photos of Blackwood Construction's greatest achievements, half of which I'd engineered, most of which I'd contributed to in ways that would never be acknowledged. In the elevator, descending from the 20th floor of the building, my designs had helped expand. I made a decision that would take 3 years to fully execute. By the time those doors opened onto the marble lobby, Celeste Blackwood, the dutiful daughter, was gone. In her place stood someone far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The first thing I did was drive to the nearest coffee shop and order the largest, strongest espresso they had. I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at the Blackwood Construction building through my windshield, and let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. 34 years old. 8 years of my life invested in a company that saw me as disposable, a master's, degree in engineering reduced to book smarts, a lifetime of dedication and expertise dismissed as dead weight. But as I sat there, something unexpected happened. Instead of the devastation I'd expected to feel, I felt something else entirely. Relief. For the first time in my adult life, I was free from the burden of trying to earn my father's approval, free from pretending that Marcus was qualified to run a company he didn't understand, free from watching my ideas get credited to other people and my contributions get minimized. Most importantly, I was free to show them exactly what they'd thrown away. The second thing I did was cash out my 401k. $47,000. Not exactly a fortune, but enough to survive while I laid the groundwork for what came next. The penalty for early withdrawal was steep, but I considered it an investment in my future. The third thing I did was rent a small office space in Southeast Portland, in a converted brick building that had once housed a textile factory. The space was nothing like the gleaming corporate headquarters I'd just left. Exposed brick walls, concrete floors, windows that actually opened to let in fresh air. It felt honest in a way that marble lobbies and mahogany conference tables never had. The fourth thing I did was something my father had taught me. Ironically enough, I started building relationships. Harrison Blackwood had always believed in the power of personal connections, but he'd never understood that those connections were built on mutual respect and shared value, not fear or obligation. Over the years, I'd developed my own network: engineers, architects, environmental consultants, city planners, people who valued expertise over family name, results over rhetoric. Dr. Rebecca Chen was the first person I called. She ran the Sustainable Architecture program at Portland State University, and we'd collaborated on several green building initiatives that my father had ultimately shelved as too expensive or too complicated. Rebecca was brilliant, visionary, and frustrated by the construction industry's resistance to environmental innovation. When I told her I was starting my own firm specializing in sustainable construction, she didn't even hesitate. "I've been waiting for this call for 2 years," she said. "Ever since you presented that solar integration proposal that Blackwood rejected. I have 6 projects that need exactly what you're offering, and I know at least a dozen architects who are looking for a construction partner who actually understands green building." The second call was to Miguel Santos, a project manager who'd left Blackwood Construction 3 months after I did. Miguel was one of the most talented construction managers I'd ever worked with, organized, detail-oriented, innovative, but he'd grown tired of watching his ideas get buried under my father's traditional methods. Traditional methods, Miguel had said during our coffee meeting at a small cafe in the Alberta district, is code for the way we've always done things, even when it's wrong. Your father's been building the same way for 30 years, and he can't see that the industry has moved past him. Miguel became my first employee, taking a significant pay cut to join a startup with no guaranteed future. But he believed in what we were building, and more importantly, he believed in my ability to build it. The third call was to Janet Morrison, a brilliant structural engineer who'd been overlooked for promotion at her current firm despite being more qualified than the men who'd advanced ahead of her. Janet specialized in seismic retrofitting and sustainable structural systems, exactly the expertise we'd need to differentiate ourselves in Portland's competitive construction market. Within 2 months, I had a team of 5 people working out of our converted factory space. Within 4 months, we had our first contract, a small mixed-use building in southeast Portland that wanted to achieve LEED Gold certification. The project wasn't large enough to be profitable, but it gave us something more valuable: proof of concept. We completed the project 3 weeks ahead of schedule and 12% under budget, while achieving the highest sustainability rating of any comparable building in Portland that year. More importantly, we documented every aspect of the process, creating a template for future projects that would allow us to bid competitively on larger contracts. Word travels fast in Portland's construction community, especially when something innovative succeeds. Within 6 months, Chen Blackwood Sustainable Solutions had 8 employees and 12 active projects. Within a year, we'd completed our first major development, a 40-unit apartment complex in the Pearl District that achieved LEED Platinum certification and was featured in Architectural Digest. The article called it a masterpiece of form and function, proving that sustainable design doesn't have to sacrifice beauty for responsibility. They interviewed me extensively about our construction methods, our environmental philosophy, and our plans for expansion. The photo spread showed our team on site, wearing hard hats and safety vests, looking competent and confident and successful. My father never mentioned seeing the article, but I knew he had. Word travels fast in Portland's construction community, and several people told me he'd been asking questions about my projects, my clients, my methods. I imagined him sitting in his office, reading about his daughter's success, trying to reconcile it with his image of me as dead weight. But I wasn't building my company for his attention or his approval. I was building it for something far more permanent and far more valuable: leverage. The construction industry is surprisingly small, especially in a city like Portland, where the same architects, engineers, contractors, and city officials work together on project after project. Reputations matter, relationships matter, and most importantly, results matter. Over the next 18 months, Chen Blackwood Sustainable Solutions built a reputation for delivering exactly what we promised: innovative, environmentally responsible construction that came in on time, under budget, and exceeded expectations. We developed proprietary methods for integrating renewable energy systems into commercial buildings, We pioneered new approaches to sustainable material sourcing. We created construction techniques that reduced waste by 40% compared to traditional methods. More importantly, we attracted clients who valued innovation over tradition, results over relationships, competence over connections. These were exactly the kinds of clients that Blackwood Construction was losing to more progressive competitors. The real breakthrough came in year 2, when the city of Portland announced a massive urban renewal project worth $200 million. The project required exactly the kind of sustainable, innovative approach that had become our specialty. More importantly, it required a firm with both established credentials and fresh perspectives, something too big for a newcomer to handle alone, but too complex for traditional contractors to understand. The perfect opportunity for a strategic partnership, or, if I played my cards right, the perfect opportunity for a hostile takeover. I spent weeks researching every construction company in Portland, looking for the right fit. I needed a firm with established city relationships, existing infrastructure, and most importantly, financial vulnerability. What I found was better than I'd hoped. Blackwood Construction was struggling. It wasn't obvious from the outside. My father was too proud to let his weaknesses show publicly. The company still occupied its gleaming downtown headquarters, still employed over 100 people, still had its name on buildings throughout the city, but I knew how to read between the lines of public filings, and I had contacts throughout the industry who filled in the gaps. The company had overextended itself on several traditional projects that had run into cost overruns and delays. A luxury hotel downtown had been plagued by design flaws and construction mistakes that had pushed the project 18 months behind schedule and $3 million over budget. A shopping center in Beaverton had been delayed by permit issues that should have been anticipated and resolved during the planning phase. Most tellingly, the construction boom was shifting towards sustainable building, and Blackwood Construction was being left behind by more innovative competitors. The green building market that my father had dismissed as luxury extras now represented nearly 40% of new commercial construction in Portland. Companies that had embraced sustainable practices early were winning contracts that Blackwood Construction couldn't even bid on competitively. Marcus, it turned out, was not the business genius my father had believed him to be. His networking skills were impressive, and he could charm clients over dinner or drinks, but he lacked the technical knowledge to properly manage complex projects. Several major clients had quietly shifted their business to other firms after experiencing delays, cost overruns, and communication breakdowns on Marcus-managed projects. The Henderson office complex was the perfect example. Marcus had won the contract through his relationship with the client, but he'd underbid the project by nearly 20% because he didn't understand the technical requirements. When construction began, it became clear that the building's HVAC system was inadequately designed for the space. The electrical infrastructure couldn't support the client's technology needs, and the foundation work had been miscalculated for the soil conditions. I learned about the Henderson project from Janet Morrison, who'd been approached by Blackwood Construction to consult on the structural problems. "They're looking at $1 million cost overrun, minimum," she told me over lunch. "Maybe more if they can't figure out the foundation issues. Your brother keeps calling meetings to strategize solutions, but you can't strategize your way out of bad engineering." The Henderson project was typical of Marcus's approach to business development. Win the contract now, figure out how to deliver it later. It was a strategy that might work in industries where the technical requirements were simple or standardized. But construction projects are complex systems where small mistakes can cascade into major problems. Most tellingly, Blackwood Construction had been passed over for 3 major city contracts in the past 18 months. Contracts they would have won automatically 5 years earlier. The construction landscape was changing, and my father's company was becoming obsolete. When I approached him about a partnership for the urban renewal project, I came armed with more than just a proposal. I came with solutions to problems he didn't even know he had. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in November, almost exactly 2 years after he'd called me dead weight. I arrived at the Blackwood Construction building, wearing my best suit and carrying a leather portfolio that contained the most important presentation of my life. The receptionist, a different woman than the one who'd avoided eye contact when I'd been fired, greeted me professionally and directed me to the 20th floor conference room. As I rode the elevator up, I couldn't help but remember my last trip in this same elevator, descending in defeat and humiliation. The irony of returning as an equal, a competitor, a potential partner, wasn't lost on me. My father was waiting in the conference room along with Marcus and their CFO, David Kim. The room looked exactly the same. Polished mahogany table, floor to ceiling, windows overlooking downtown Portland, walls lined with photos of Blackwood Construction's greatest achievements. But something felt different. The energy was different. Where I'd once felt intimidated by the corporate grandeur, I now felt like I belonged. "Celeste," my father said, standing to shake my hand. "Thank you for coming." His tone was carefully neutral, professional, but not warm. Marcus nodded in my direction, but didn't get up from his chair. David Kim, whom I'd known for years, smiled genuinely and asked about my company's recent success. "I've been following your work," David said. "Impressive growth in a short time. The Architectural Digest feature was particularly noteworthy." "Thank you," I replied, taking my seat at the conference table. "We've been fortunate to work with some visionary clients who understand the value of sustainable construction." I opened my portfolio and distributed copies of my proposal to the three men. The document was 47 pages long, meticulously researched and beautifully formatted. It outlined not just a partnership for the urban renewal project, but a comprehensive strategy for how our two companies could collaborate to dominate Portland's sustainable construction market. Chen Blackwood could provide the sustainable expertise and innovative construction methods, I began, my voice steady and confident. Blackwood Construction has the infrastructure, established relationships, and city connections. Together, we could win this contract and position ourselves as the premier sustainable construction partnership in the Pacific Northwest. I walked them through the proposal section by section: market analysis, technical capabilities, financial projections, implementation timeline. I'd anticipated every question, researched every competitor, calculated every risk. It was the kind of comprehensive strategic planning that Marcus had never demonstrated and that I'd been capable of for years. My father listened to my presentation with the same poker face he'd perfected over decades of negotiations. But I could see the calculations running behind his eyes. He knew his company needed this contract, and he knew they couldn't win it alone. When I finished, the room was quiet for several long moments. Finally, my father spoke. "What kind of partnership are you proposing?" he asked. "Joint venture. 50-50 split on this project specifically, with options to extend the partnership to future projects if it proves successful." "Absolutely not." He leaned back in his chair, and I saw a flash of the old Harrison Blackwood, the man who'd built his company through force of will and refused to compromise. Blackwood Construction would be the primary contractor. Your firm would be a subcontractor, specializing in the green building components. I'd expected this response. That won't work. The city specifically wants innovative leadership, not traditional contracting with green add-ons. They want a firm that understands sustainable building from the ground up, that can integrate environmental considerations into every aspect of the project. Marcus finally spoke up. "We can learn whatever we need to learn about green building. It's not that complicated." I turned to look at my brother, this man who'd been handed opportunities I'd had to fight for, who'd been promoted over me despite having a fraction of my qualifications. "Marcus, how many LEED certified projects have you managed?" "That's not the point." "It absolutely is the point. This isn't a traditional construction project where you can learn as you go. Sustainable building requires expertise that takes years to develop. The city isn't going to risk a $200 million project on good intentions and wishful thinking." David Kim cleared his throat. "What kind of partnership structure would satisfy the city's requirements while protecting both companies' interests? For the next 3 hours, we negotiated. I knew I had leverage. They needed my expertise more than I needed their infrastructure. But I also knew that pushing too hard would end the conversation entirely. My father was proud, and Marcus was defensive about his capabilities. In the end, we agreed on a 60-40 split, with Blackwood Construction maintaining primary contractor status, but Chen Blackwood having full authority over design, sustainability implementation, and technical oversight. It wasn't ideal, but it got me what I needed: access to Blackwood Construction's books. The partnership agreement required full financial disclosure between the firms. Standard practice for joint ventures, but it gave me unprecedented insight into the company I'd grown up with, the company that had shaped my entire life. What I discovered was worse than I'd imagined. Blackwood Construction wasn't just struggling, it was hemorrhaging money. Years of poor project management, cost overruns, and declining client satisfaction had created a downward spiral that my father was desperately trying to hide. The Henderson project alone was going to cost them nearly $2 million in overruns and penalties. 3 other major projects were experiencing similar problems. The company's credit lines were maxed out. They'd borrowed against equipment, inventory, and real estate to maintain cash flow. My father had personally guaranteed several loans, putting his own assets at risk to keep the business afloat. Most damaging of all, their client base was eroding. Long-term relationships that had sustained the company for decades were ending, as clients shifted to more innovative, reliable contractors. The construction boom was passing Blackwood Construction by, and they were too proud or too stubborn to adapt. He spent hours poring over financial statements, project reports, and client communications. The picture that emerged was of a company in crisis, led by men who either couldn't see the problems or refused to acknowledge them. That's when I realized that a partnership wasn't enough. Blackwood Construction was going to fail within 18 months, regardless of whether we won the urban renewal contract. The company needed more than sustainable building expertise. It needed completely new leadership, new strategies, new approaches to everything from project management to client relations. It needed someone who understood both the technical and business sides of construction. Someone who could see problems before they became crises. Someone who'd been preparing for this opportunity her entire life. It needed me. But I couldn't just walk in and demand control of the company. My father would never voluntarily hand over leadership to the daughter he'd dismissed as dead weight. Marcus would never accept being displaced by his older sister. I needed a different approach. Something that would give me the power to save the company whether they wanted to be saved or not. I needed to buy them out. The idea was audacious, maybe impossible. Chen Blackwood Sustainable Solutions was successful, but we were still a small company compared to Blackwood Construction. I didn't have the personal wealth to buy out a construction company worth millions of dollars, even a struggling one. But I had something more valuable than money. I had information, relationships, and time. Over the next 6 months, while we worked together on the urban renewal project bid, I quietly assembled the resources I'd need for a buyout. I secured preliminary financing from 3 different sources: a green technology investment fund, a community development bank that specialized in supporting women-owned businesses, and a private investor who'd made his fortune in sustainable construction. More importantly, I documented every problem, every inefficiency, every missed opportunity at Blackwood Construction. Not to sabotage the partnership, but to build an airtight case for why the company needed new leadership. The Urban Renewal Project proposal was submitted in March, and we won the contract in April. It should have been a celebration. The largest contract in Blackwood Construction's history. Proof that the partnership was working. Validation of everything I'd argued about the importance of sustainable building expertise. Instead, it became clear that winning the contract had only delayed the inevitable. Blackwood Construction's financial problems were too severe to be solved by one successful project, even a large one. They needed systematic changes that my father and Marcus were either unwilling or unable to make. That's when I made my move. I called a meeting in late May, ostensibly to discuss project timelines and resource allocation for the urban renewal contract. But when I walked into the conference room, I brought someone unexpected. My attorney, Sarah Chen, Rebecca's sister, as it happened, and a carefully prepared offer to purchase 100% of Blackwood Construction. The silence that followed was profound. My father stared at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. Marcus looked confused, glancing between me and our father like he was watching a tennis match where he didn't understand the rules. "What is this?" my father said finally, his voice tight with something between anger and disbelief. "It's an offer to purchase 100% of Blackwood Construction," I said calmly, my hands folded on the table in front of me. "Fair market, value based on current assets, projected earnings, and existing liabilities. This is ridiculous. The company isn't for sale." "Actually," my attorney interjected, "given the current financial situation, this might be the best option for preserving the company's legacy and protecting the employees' jobs." I watched my father's face as the reality of his situation became clear. He could reject my offer, but that would mean bankruptcy within months. He could try to find another buyer, but anyone else would likely gut the company and sell off the assets. Or he could accept my offer and watch his daughter, his dead-weight daughter, become his boss. "The offer includes a comprehensive management transition plan," I continued. "You could stay on as a senior consultant for up to 3 years, with full benefits, and a consulting fee that's equivalent to your current salary. Marcus could continue in project management, with opportunities for advancement based on performance. The Blackwood name would remain on the building, and all current employees would be protected for at least 1 year." "You planned this," my father said, his voice tight with something between anger and admiration. "The partnership, the financial disclosure, the access to our books, you planned all of this." "I plan to succeed," I said. "Just like you taught me. You taught me that construction is about problem solving, about thinking 3 steps ahead. You taught me that relationships matter, that reputation matters, that results matter most of all. I learned those lessons very well." Marcus finally found his voice. "Dad, you can't seriously be considering this." But my father was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not pride, exactly, but recognition. For the first time in my life, he was seeing me clearly. Not as his disappointing daughter, not as dead weight, but as exactly what I'd always been. A competent, strategic, ruthlessly effective businesswoman who'd inherited all his best qualities and learned to use them better than he ever had. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "About the financial problems, the cash flow issues, the Henderson project overruns?" 6 months, I said honestly. "But I've been building toward this moment for 3 years, ever since you told me I was dead weight." He flinched at those words, as if hearing them reflected back had given them new weight, new meaning. "You could have told me about the company's problems. We could have worked together to fix them." "When?" I asked, letting years of frustration creep into my voice. "When I presented the sustainable building proposal that you dismissed without consideration? When I tried to warn you about the market shift toward green construction, and you told me to focus on engineering and leave business strategy to Marcus? When I brought you contract opportunities that you gave to other people to manage?" The room fell silent except for the distant sound of construction equipment from the street below. The sound of Portland building its future, with or without Blackwood Construction. My father looked down at the offer again, studying the numbers with the same intensity he'd once brought to blueprint reviews. I knew he was calculating more than just dollars and cents. He was calculating the cost of his pride against the survival of everything he'd built. "I need time to think," he said finally. "You have 72 hours, I replied. "After that, I withdraw the offer and pursue other options." I gathered my documents and stood to leave, but my father's voice stopped me at the door. "Celeste." I turned back, meeting his steel-gray eyes that had intimidated me as a child, dismissed me as a young woman, and were now looking at me with something approaching respect. Why? He asked. Why buy the company? You've already proven you can succeed without it. Chen Blackwood is thriving. You could let this place fail and build your own empire from scratch. It was a good question, and one I'd asked myself many times over the past months. Revenge would have been simpler. Let the company fail and watch from a distance as my father lost everything he'd valued more than his daughter. Justice would have been satisfying. Prove that his assessment of my worth had been catastrophically wrong. But that wasn't what I wanted anymore. Because, I said, choosing my words carefully, someone needs to preserve what's worth preserving and fix what's broken. And I'm the only one in this family who knows the difference. He called me 67 hours later. I accept your offer, he said without preamble. But I have conditions. We met the next afternoon to finalize the details. The conditions were reasonable, even generous considering his negotiating position. He wanted to maintain his office for at least 6 months during the transition. He wanted input on major strategic decisions for the first year. He wanted assurance that long-term employees would be protected, that the company's reputation would be preserved, that 40 years of relationship building wouldn't be discarded for the sake of modernization. Most importantly, he wanted to understand how I planned to turn things around. The Henderson project is bleeding money, he said, spreading the financial reports across the conference table. The Beaverton shopping center is 6 months behind schedule. We've got 3 major clients threatening to take their business elsewhere. How do you plan to fix all of that? I opened my laptop and showed him the comprehensive turnaround plan I'd been developing for months. It was 68 pages long, covering everything from immediate crisis management to long-term strategic positioning. First, we stop the bleeding, I said, clicking through slides that showed project-by-project analysis and solutions. The Henderson project can be salvaged, but only with proper engineering oversight and realistic timeline adjustments. I've already identified the structural issues and developed solutions that will add cost, but prevent bigger problems later. How much cost? $800,000, spread over 4 months. Expensive, but less expensive than the $2 million overrun you're currently facing. He nodded, making notes on a legal pad. What about the shopping center? Permit issues, mostly. The city is being difficult because previous submittals were incomplete and showed lack of understanding of new environmental regulations. I have relationships with the planning department that can expedite resolution. For the next 2 hours, we went through every troubled project, every client relationship, every operational inefficiency. It felt like the most honest conversation we'd ever had. Not as father and daughter, but as 2 construction professionals analyzing problems and developing solutions. You've thought of everything, he said finally, leaning back in his chair. I've had 3 years to think about it. There's one more thing, he said, his voice taking on a different tone. I owe you an apology. I looked up from the contract documents, surprised. I was wrong, he continued, the words coming slowly, as if he was translating them from a language he didn't speak fluently. About you being dead weight, about Marcus, being better suited for the business, about dismissing your ideas, your expertise, your vision for what this company could become. What changed your mind? He gestured toward the documents spread across the table. Purchase agreements, financial analyses, turnaround plans, all prepared with meticulous attention to detail and deep understanding of the industry. This, he said, you didn't just see an opportunity, you created one. You didn't just identify our problems, you solved them before we even knew they existed. You did what I couldn't do, what Marcus couldn't do. You saved the company. It wasn't the apology I'd dreamed of as a child, full of emotion and regret and recognition of all the ways he'd failed me. It was something better. Acknowledgement from a man who rarely admitted mistakes. Recognition from someone whose approval I'd stopped seeking but never stopped wanting. I should have seen it sooner, he added quietly. Your potential, your capabilities. I should have listened. You weren't ready to listen then, I said. Maybe I wasn't ready to lead. You were always ready. I just couldn't see past my own assumptions about what leadership looked like. We signed the papers on a Tuesday afternoon in November, exactly 3 years and 1 month after he'd called me dead weight. The transaction was complex. Asset purchases, liability transfers, employment agreements, transition schedules. But the essential truth was simple. Harrison Blackwood's daughter now owned Harrison Blackwood's company. The next morning, I walked into the Blackwood construction building as its owner. The nameplate on my office door read, Celeste Blackwood, Chief Executive Officer. The office was the same one where my father had dismissed my sustainable building proposal, where he'd told me I lacked business sense, where he'd unknowingly set in motion the events that would transfer his life's work into my hands. My first act as owner was to call an all-hands meeting. I stood in the main conference room, looking out at faces I'd known for years, some curious, some skeptical, some openly hostile. These were people who'd watched me grow up in the business, who'd seen me get passed over for promotions, who'd witnessed my father's dismissive treatment of my ideas and contributions. I know this transition raises questions, I began, my voice carrying easily through the room. Some of you are wondering if this is some elaborate revenge scheme, if I'm going to make dramatic changes or settle old scores with people who didn't support me. I paused, letting them absorb the possibility, seeing the worry in some faces and curiosity in others. The truth is simpler than that. This company was dying, and I refused to let it die. We're going to change. Yes, but we're going to change in ways that make us stronger, more competitive, more relevant to the future of construction. Over the following months, that's exactly what we did. I brought in Miguel Santos as Director of Operations, Janet Morrison as Chief Engineering Officer, and Rebecca Chen as Director of Sustainable Development. We retrained existing staff in green building practices, invested in new equipment and technology, and restructured project management systems to emphasize collaboration over hierarchy. Some employees left, unable or unwilling to adapt to the new culture. A few were let go, people whose commitment to the old ways of doing things made them liabilities in our new approach. But most stayed, energized by the company's renewed sense of purpose and clear direction. The Henderson project became our first major turnaround success. By applying proper engineering oversight and sustainable construction methods, we not only solved the structural problems, but turned the project into a showcase for innovative building techniques. The client was so impressed that they hired us for 2 additional projects worth a combined $12 million. The urban renewal project became our flagship achievement. We completed it 6 weeks ahead of schedule and 8% under budget, while achieving the highest sustainability rating in the city's history. The project won 3 major industry awards and was featured in national construction magazines as an example of how traditional contractors could successfully transition to sustainable building practices. The success led to a cascade of new opportunities. Portland's construction community took notice of what we'd accomplished, and clients who'd never considered sustainable building began asking us to bid on their projects. We hired 23 new employees in our first year, opened a second office in Seattle, and established partnerships with sustainable building firms in San Francisco and Denver. Marcus struggled with the transition more than anyone else. Going from heir apparent to middle management was a difficult adjustment, made worse by watching his older sister succeed in areas where he'd failed. For the first 6 months, he was defensive, resentful, and openly critical of the changes I was implementing. But gradually, as he found his footing in a role that matched his actual skills rather than his assumed destiny, he began to contribute meaningfully to the company's success. It turned out that Marcus was actually quite good at client relations and business development, when he wasn't trying to manage technical aspects of projects he didn't understand. I assigned him to work with our marketing team on developing new client relationships, particularly in the luxury residential market where his networking skills and charm were genuine assets. Within a year, he'd brought in 8 new high-end, clients, and established Blackwood Chen as the premier sustainable luxury home builder in Portland. My father kept his office for exactly 6 months, then moved to a smaller consulting space down the hall. He remained involved in major decisions, but gradually ceded day-to-day control. Sometimes I caught him watching me during meetings, and I wondered what he was thinking. Pride, regret, or simply amazement at how thoroughly his assumptions about his children had been wrong. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do. I was no longer the daughter trying to prove herself worthy of her father's approval. I was the CEO of a thriving construction company, respected by my employees, recognized by my industry, and confident in my ability to lead. One evening, almost exactly a year after the purchase, I was working late when my father knocked on my office door. It was past 8 o'clock, and most of the building was empty, but I often stayed late to catch up on administrative work and strategic planning. "I wanted to show you something," he said, holding up a magazine. It was Pacific Business Journal, with a cover story about the region's most innovative companies. Blackwood Chen Sustainable Construction was featured prominently, with a photo of me standing in front of our award-winning urban renewal project. "They called you a visionary leader," he said, sitting down across from my desk. "Said you were revolutionizing the construction industry in the Pacific Northwest." I looked at the magazine, then at my father. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before, something that looked like pride mixed with regret. "The article mentions that you're being considered for the Commercial Construction Executive of the Year award," he continued. That's quite an honor. I was nominated for it twice, but never won." "It's just an industry award, Dad. What we've accomplished here is more important than any recognition." "Is it?" He set the magazine down and looked around my office, the same office where he'd built his career, made the decisions that had shaped our family business, and ultimately made the choice that had transferred everything to me. "I've been thinking a lot lately about the choices I made, the assumptions I operated under, the ways I treated you, the opportunities I gave Marcus that should have gone to you." "We don't need to relitigate the past," I said gently. "What matters is what we're building now." "But the past matters," he insisted. "It matters because I need you to understand that I was wrong. Not just strategically wrong, but fundamentally wrong about who you were and what you were capable of." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Portland skyline dotted with buildings that bore our company's signature. "I spent 40 years building this company on the assumption that construction was a man's business, that technical expertise wasn't as important as relationship building, that tradition was more valuable than innovation. Every one of those assumptions was wrong, and you proved it." "You built something valuable," I said. "I just helped it evolve." "No." He turned back to face me, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. "You saved it. If you hadn't stepped in, hadn't forced me to confront reality, this company would have failed within 2 years. 40 years of work would have been lost, and it would have been my fault." The silence stretched between us, filled with 34 years of complicated history. "I'm proud of you," he said finally. "I should have said that years ago, should have recognized your potential, should have supported your vision instead of dismissing it. I'm saying it now because it's true, and because I need you to hear it." After he left, I sat alone in my office, looking out at the city lights reflecting off the industrial district where I'd grown up. The girl who used to fall asleep to the sound of freight trains had become the woman who signed their shipping contracts. The daughter who'd been called dead weight had become the CEO who carried the weight of an entire company's future. But more than that, I'd become someone who understood that the most profound victories aren't about defeating your enemies. They're about transforming the very systems that created the conflict in the first place. The second year brought even greater success. We completed our largest project to date, a mixed-use development in downtown Portland that integrated commercial, space, residential units, and public green space in a way that had never been attempted before. The project required every aspect of our expertise: sustainable engineering, innovative construction methods, complex project management, and extensive client coordination. When it was finished, it became the most photographed building in Portland, featured in architectural magazines around the world as an example of how cities could build sustainably without sacrificing functionality or aesthetics. More importantly, it generated enough profit to fund our expansion into the California market and establish Blackwood Chen as a legitimate competitor to the largest construction firms on the West Coast. The third year brought recognition that extended far beyond Portland's construction community. I was invited to speak at industry conferences, consulted by other companies trying to make their own transitions to sustainable building, and featured in national business magazines as an example of successful corporate transformation. The Commercial Construction Executive of the Year award came in December, presented at a ceremony in Seattle that was attended by construction industry leaders from across the Pacific Northwest. My father flew up for the ceremony, sitting in the front row as I accepted the award and delivered a speech about the future of sustainable construction. 5 years ago, I said from the podium, looking out at an audience of the people who now considered me their peer. I was told that I was dead weight, that I didn't have what it took to succeed in this industry. That assessment was wrong, but not for the reasons you might think. I paused, finding my father's face in the audience. I wasn't dead weight. I was counterweight. I was the balance that the industry needed, the perspective that traditional construction companies were missing, the expertise that could transform good companies into great ones. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is exactly the person everyone needs. The speech received a standing ovation, but the moment I treasured most came afterward, when my father approached me at the reception. "That was a hell of a speech," he said, genuine pride evident in his voice. "I had a lot to say. You always did. I just wasn't listening." Today, Blackwood Chen Sustainable Construction employs over 300 people across 5 offices on the West Coast. We've completed projects worth more than $500 million, including some of the most innovative sustainable buildings in North America. We've won dozens of industry awards, been featured in countless publications, and established ourselves as leaders in the field that I'd advocated for years before anyone was willing to listen. But the numbers, impressive as they aren't the real measure of success. The real measure is the culture we've built. A company where expertise is valued over connections, where innovation is rewarded over tradition, where the best ideas win regardless of who proposes them. Young engineers and project managers join our company because they know their contributions will be recognized and their potential will be developed. Women enter construction knowing they'll be judged on their capabilities, not their gender. Sustainable building practices that were once considered luxury extras are now standard across all our projects. Marcus has found his place in this new environment, leading our residential division and building genuine expertise in luxury sustainable home construction. He'll never be the CEO that my father once imagined him becoming, but he's become something more valuable. A competent, respected professional who contributes meaningfully to our success. My father officially retired last year, though he still maintains an office in our building and occasionally consults on major projects. Our relationship has evolved into something I never thought possible. Genuine mutual respect between two professionals who happen to be related. Sometimes, during our monthly lunch meetings, he'll mention decisions he wishes he'd made differently, opportunities he wishes he'd given me earlier, assumptions he wishes he'd questioned sooner. I appreciate the acknowledgement, but I don't dwell on alternate histories. What matters is what we built from the foundation we had. The sign outside our building reads, Blackwood Chen Sustainable Construction, but everyone in the industry knows who really runs the company. And every time I sign a contract or close a deal or make a decision that shapes the future of this business, I remember that moment in my father's office when he told me I was dead weight. He was right about one thing. I was carrying weight. But it wasn't dead weight. It was the weight of responsibility, the weight of vision, the weight of everything this company could become if someone had the courage to lead it there. I carried that weight for 34 years, through dismissal and doubt and disappointment. And when the time came, I used that weight to tip the balance of power permanently in my direction. Some people might call that revenge. I call it justice. And justice, as it turns out, makes an excellent foundation for building something that lasts. The freight trains still run through Portland every morning, carrying lumber and steel and the raw materials of construction. But now, when I hear them from my office window, they don't just remind me of where I came from. They remind me of where I'm going, of the empire I'm building, of the legacy I'm creating for the next generation of women who refuse to be dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated. My father called me dead weight. 3 years later, I bought his company. Today, that company is stronger, more profitable, and more respected than it's ever been in its 40-year history. I wasn't dead weight. I was the foundation that everything else was built on. And foundations, when they're built right, last forever. If you've ever felt underestimated by your own family, or if you've had to prove yourself against impossible odds, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is share our experiences and remind each other that we're stronger than anyone gives us credit for. Thanks for watching Revenge Treats. Remember to like and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold.